Nearly 150 men digging trenches and building dams.
Time after time they tried, only to find that courage was not enough.
A light coming out of the water. That was one of the most sort of reassuring and wonderful sights.
How many of you? 13? Yeah. Brilliant.
Cave Rescue has undergone vast changes since it came into being in 1935. Tragedies and traumas have constantly driven both innovation and development.
Cave Rescue and cave rescuers are probably more multitasked, capable than any other sort of rescue team you can imagine. That's no disrespect to Mountain Rescue and the likes, and the conditions and problems that they have to deal with. I mean, when you think about, things we have to deal with, everything from sort of collapsed caves, jacking up, diverting water, communications alone in caves is massive.
Under the central organisation of the Cave Rescue Council, 15 organisations now cover underground rescue throughout the British Isles.
There are underground things in every county in the country, even though they're not normal caving areas. For example, I was surprised some years ago when I was invited to go on a trip with a friend of mine down who was managing a disused ironstone mine at Scunthorpe. And I was staggered to find out there are 125 miles of passages in this thing.
Surface rescues in the past used to be relatively small in terms of the numbers. Now, because of people who've got outdoor activities at mine, they're being encouraged to walk and climb and do all these other things. The numbers now are much bigger than they ever were in the sort of 70s and 80s.
As the skills and abilities of this voluntary workforce have increasingly been recognised, they have found themselves called upon to help with an ever wider range of rescue situations.
Dealing with sheep, sheep are notorious, especially in ground caves, because they always go hunting for the elusive piece of grass. I've lost track of how many sheep we must have rescued. Hundreds and hundreds of sheep.
Many a muddy dog has been reunited with its owner, not to mention numerous cows, calves, bullocks, some alive, some long dead. Now with the public services under ever-increasing pressure, voluntary rescue teams provide welcome additional manpower in times of crisis.
I think, and the relationships with the statutory services, police, fire, ambulance in an area, depend very much on local conditions. If you're a busy team and have a lot of contact with them, then relationships are likely to be easier. If you don't have much trade, or a more recently formed team, you haven't got the history of cooperation with the other emergency services, sometimes it can be difficult to form. I can remember when Derbyshire CRO turned out on a shout and the fire service were there, it would be like two packs of wild dogs meeting in the street, circling around each other, waiting for to make the wrong move, as it were. And yet here we are now, we're filming inside a fantastic base that's been provided rent-free for Derbyshire CRO by Derbyshire Fire Service.
At the same time, cave rescues have diminished in number. Nevertheless, in all regions, it's still the cave rescues that can be the most demanding and on occasions dangerous.
He sustained his fall at about 8:30. That was 500 feet below the entrance and over 3,500 feet from the entrance, so they'd been a long way underground.
You don't realise if you're going to find somebody who's still conscious. You may find a corpse. You don't know. You've got to prepare yourself for that. In Doug's case, he was fully conscious.
1, 2, right, dive! Once they decided that Douglas could be moved fairly quickly, rather than wait for the inconvenience of the stretcher, Darnie Bradshaw put Douglas on his shoulders, and with a tight rope from Douglas to the top of the pitch, Darnie basically climbed the caving ladder with someone on his shoulders, which is a fairly extraordinary feat.
Okay, mate. Right, he's all yours now.
He began the long and painful journey nearly 3/4 of a mile, strapped into a stretcher through narrow, twisting, wet passages, still suffering from shock.
When we reached the sump, Doug was aware enough of what was going to happen. It's no problem to them.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, down.
Here he comes, Dad. There he is.
So I've got immense gratitude towards the rescue organisations, and I really appreciate the efforts and the amount of people that were involved in that rescue.
Over many years as a controller, Jack Pickup has attended over 500 incidents. Inevitably, some involve friends.
Well, it's never easy retrieving somebody that you know from a cave, in particular if they're dead.
The nature of rescues often involves entering caves under their most dangerous conditions. Kingsdale's Roughton Pot, in normal conditions, is an exhilarating descent. In flood, it can become a death trap. It was here in 1939, when several young cavers were trapped by a flood, that Yorkshire Cave Rescue had to deal with one of its first fatal accidents. Sadly, coincidentally, in similar conditions in 1986, the Cave Rescue Organisation was for the first time to suffer the loss of one of its own rescuers.
We got this call to go to 2 cavers that were missing in Roughton Pot in Kingsdale. He was so keen and so enthusiastic and competent that they'd made him a provisional underground controller. They got to crossing a ledge underneath a waterfall that Dave, for whatever reason, fell off the ledge but was still fastened to the rope, a traverse rope, and of course because of the weight of the water and his weight, he was washed off the ledge and hung down in the bottom of a V, which he couldn't recover. Phil, who was with him, tried to pull him out, but it was just impossible, and so unfortunately he drowned. What sometimes crosses your mind is that, you know, this might happen to you, that you might die on a rescue, and the longer that you do it, the more of the chances that it could occur.
A party of cavers from the University of Central Lancashire got trapped by floods. One of the group leaders was swept away to his death. The other 15 members of the party were already suffering from severe hypothermia when Michael Hale arrived from Cave Rescue.
There were 15 people, all up to their chests in water about here. The water absolutely pouring past them, all having to hang on like mad to stop themselves being washed away. And they were completely helpless, just like a load of puppies floating around in the water, all these 15 people. Some nasty decisions had to be made. I mean, it was touch and go whether I was actually going to felt that I could stay with them, whether it was faced with the situation of thinking, well, am I going to look after myself here and get out and survive, or am I going to have to stay down here and sort of watch the water levels come higher and higher until there's no airspace left, and then by which time we'd have all perished.
Since the first rescue teams were formed in the mid-1930s, caving and caving equipment have seen many changes. The number of caves and the determination of explorers to discover them has increased accordingly.
Every year, of course, new caves are found or rediscoveries are made. It's one of caving's attractions, of course. What it means is that the teams have to be ready to go into everywhere that cavers get to and extract them. And if local cavers find somewhere that's more extreme, then the teams have to be ready to go in there in case they should be needed.
The problem is that you make them passable for somebody who's capable, but then if they become incapable because of an injury or something, then it's almost impossible or very difficult to get them out. And so we had a situation at one time where we had a committee, a tight holes committee, where we looked at all the caves in the Yorkshire Dales, for example, and decided which were the top of our list, and in fact made plans and indeed practiced and located various spots in these caves should it ever occur. So it was the subject of a lot of hard work at one stage in order to, you know, if you like, understand the problems that we would have to get somebody out of these places.
But I think that most extreme caving is by and large done by very experienced, well-equipped and extreme cavers who are less likely to get into trouble in the first place and more likely, if they do, to be able to extract themselves without needing a rescue team.
3, stop.
Nevertheless, extreme accidents in extreme places will inevitably happen, and the teams need to be prepared to deal with them when they do. And that can only happen with ever more sophisticated equipment and training.
Caving has changed enormously, and cave rescues had to change with it. It's no longer enough for team members just to be competent cavers, they also need to regularly train with specialist equipment. These are 10mm SDS or SDS Plus bits, okay? We only have 10mm expansion anchors in our kits at the moment, so what we don't need is a whole selection of different drill bits. We're just going with one type of anchor, one type of drill bit, no confusion. I'm not going to go absolutely hell for leather on this, just tap it in gently until it finds the back of the rock. We're always using 2 rope systems when we're doing our hauls. We can have both ropes running to the horizontal setup, both ropes running to the vertical setup, or one rope running to either.
Zip them into our bag, do the straps up, strap the main body of the stretcher up, and then we're ready to go.
What we're going to do, we're going to start jacking slowly and gently. You see the jaws are starting to spread there, and as we jack, we're going to slide the wedge underneath alongside without putting any part of yourself or your fingers underneath the load.
Throughout the country, rescue practices and training take place on a regular basis in caves, in mines and with other services. Paradoxically, the less incidents there are, the more the teams need to practice.
In any rescue team, I would suggest that after the members, the most important thing is communications.
The first communication was a runner. The only way you could find out what was going on down the cave was to send a runner down. And you just picked a nice, a good fast caver, and he'd go down and find out what was going on, come back and report to the surface. Then we had the telephone, which worked okay. But then, of course, after that, people had started experimenting with underground communication.
We've got you. We were just about to send someone up to Echo Haven to see if you'd got stopped by the water.
Could you give us a report on what the weather's like?
Ground 2. So, yep, that's come in from the surface and saying surface received from underground 2, so they've got us now.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Now, with modern electronics, compact devices like the Cave Link can transmit through hundreds of feet of solid rock to the surface, and that can knock hours off the underground response time.
If somebody came to BCRC and said, how do you know the XYZ team are up to the job? And hitherto, of course, all we could say was, well, they're good blokes, they can do it. So now, really, to protect the teams and the service, we now have a peer review system where teams can take a look at themselves on a sort of national template and people from other teams can take a friendly look at them, so that we can sign off teams from time to time to say that as the national body we are content that the team is up to standard.
The Gloucestershire team, for instance, have on their patch Otter Hole, a cave notorious because the entrance series floods at high tide, trapping cavers inside.
After 24 hours of drama, injured and trapped inside a complex cave system, freedom for Laura Trowbridge tonight, thanks to the heroic efforts of more than 100 people.
The difficult entrance series leads to some of the most beautiful cave passage in Britain. Laura had been on her way to this when she slipped on mud and fell 2 metres.
I tried to stand up and felt a huge amount of pain in my back and my leg, and that was when I knew it wasn't quite all right.
Once the rescue team eventually reached her, they had no real way to assess just how serious her back injuries were. And although she was immobilised in a stretcher, the balance now had to be struck between care and reaching the tidal sump before it closed.
We were back at base listening to the radios, and they couldn't get her past the tight squeeze at the entrance.
You basically have to bend your body through something like a sort of a zigzag bend through the rocks to get out, and that wasn't possible with the spinal splint on.
Well, everyone was debating and talking about how they were going to resolve this, how they were going to get the stretcher and me through this tight corkscrew turn and the section of cave beyond it. I decided that it would be a good move for me to unstrap myself from the stretcher and crawl through. I just did what I felt needed to be done at the time to make it finish.
We could hear screams of pain as she was pushing herself through. Heaven knows what she was going through, but she had to do that to get through, because otherwise the alternatives were just too lengthy and too risky.
It was very painful crawling through the cave. Very, very painful, and maybe a little part of me is proud that I could do that and I didn't give up.
She's protecting herself, obviously, as she goes through the narrow passages with her hands, keeping up, defending herself off of the rocks, and she's in very good spirits.
Laura was helicoptered to hospital this evening. She's understood to have a fractured pelvis, but is in good spirits.
And it's sometimes not just the cave incidents that are demanding.
2 overlapping incidents in May and June 1989, and they really stretched us. It started with the search of a boy, Michael Bolton, who had gone missing from home in Eyam. This turned into a huge search involving mountain rescue and the police, because foul play was suspected as well. And the area which was being searched, there are hundreds of caves and mines and culverts and all sorts of things. But as the unfortunately unsuccessful search for the boy was winding down, we were asked to join the police in another job with a search for a murder weapon, which they believed had been dropped down a mine shaft. Now, those of you who know the sort of Money Ash area of Derbyshire will know that there's no shortage of mine shafts, so there was quite a big job. The joint statistics from those two are quite interesting, because over 42 days, 117 team members turned out on 236 occasions on 22 days.
From time to time, rescue controllers are called upon to make life or death decisions, often based on less than definite information.
The one that was the most daunting, really, in its potential outcome was the Sleetsgill Cave incident, with those 2 people trapped at the far end of the main gallery. And most people had written them off for dead. I hadn't. I mean, I was on record amongst people there saying, look, you've got to ask Roy and Les what they want to do, whether they want to sit tight and hope it goes down further. If it doesn't, you will have to dive out, or do you want to try and go for it now? That was forestalled, as it happened, because I got a forecast from the Met Office, who were giving me hourly updates on things, to say that there was this very, very bad weather coming in from the west, and the chances were that we were going to experience further flooding, big time.
But you had to question that had one of them died on the dive out, and then the weather forecast was wrong, and they could have been walked out the following day. What would the public reaction have been then?
I've been fortunate in that the people around me in the team and CRO personnel, when they've come across to help us, have all been of a mind to try and bring about a successful conclusion. And none of us have walked away from problems, and none of us have seen that litigious nature of modern society as being a stopper.
Well, stand back and think about it. Cave rescue teams have been rescuing people for over 80 years. And I'm not aware of any litigation following an error made by a team or a team member during a rescue. So, yeah, I suppose it can be a worry, because caving and cave rescue does have its risks, of course, and something could go wrong. But the likelihood is very low if a team trains and uses the right people for the jobs and properly maintains its equipment and uses it appropriately. And at the end of the day, teams and team members are covered by liability insurance, of course. I think it's something that it's very easy to sit down in the pub and frighten yourselves over a pint. And I think it's one of those risks. Yes, there is a risk, but in reality, it's not a serious risk, unless you deliberately drop a boulder on somebody or something like that. But I'm not a lawyer.
In June 2018, a cave rescue in northern Thailand caught the world's imagination like no cave rescue before. 12 young football players and their coach were trapped by a sudden flood deep within a cave called Tam Luang. It just happened that an expatriate British caver, Vernon Unsworth, had been exploring the cave and knew the potential difficulties involved more than anybody else. With considerable difficulty, he eventually persuaded the Thai authorities to contact divers and rescuers in England.
I remember receiving an email saying there was a rescue going on in Thailand in a cave that some of our team, when we'd been out there that same year, had been mapping. And quickly my role became that of joint controller based in the UK with Bill Whitehouse. So we started sort of assisting the cave divers to get out to Thailand. We were working with the Foreign Office to try and make things as easy as possible. And for 3 weeks, almost on a 24/7 basis, we were there to be able to, sort of taking phone calls, assisting our cave divers getting equipment out to Thailand, getting more cave divers out. I mean, it was really intensive, wasn't it?
Emma Porter and Mike Clayton's home in Bridgnorth was suddenly to become a centre of operations in the UK.
People just didn't realise that, we're a small voluntary organisation, and, we were there in our house in Shropshire, in the middle of nowhere, dealing with this sort of international cave rescue.
Some of the best cave divers in the world, and with international rescue experience.
I never had to think for a second about whether I would go. I think it's human nature.
Britain also had the most experienced cave rescue teams, particularly for the sort of convoluted, narrow passages that the Tyre Cave contained.
And we've got police cars ready to transport, various pieces of equipment to Heathrow. At one point we had a police helicopter ready.
Soon members were on their way out, courtesy of Thai Airlines, but unsure what sort of reception they would get from the Thai rescuers. They found themselves part of a huge international operation, with the brave and accomplished Thai Navy SEALs at the forefront. It was sadly to be the death of one of these Thai divers that finally underlined the specialist skills of cave divers, which would become a major factor in the boys being found alive.
How many of you? 13? Brilliant. Yeah, best you can.
12 schoolboys aged 11 to 16 and their soccer coach found alive on their 10th day in a flooded Thai cave.
We are coming. It's okay. It's okay. Many people are coming. Many people. We are the first. Many people come.
We always knew we could get them out. It's whether we could get them out alive or not.
Of the rescue itself inside the cave system. And these are the boys actually being brought out along the cave system in that 3-day operation to rescue the 12 boys and their football coach who had been trapped in that cave for more than a fortnight.
One thing that really stood out to me was the cooperation of all the cave rescue teams.
Well, yeah, I think every team in Britain had an involvement on it, didn't they?
Every time I picked up the phone to ask for help, everybody was, dropped everything and, helped me unconditionally, which was absolutely phenomenal. And it just shows that cooperation we have between the teams within Britain.
It's quite the opposite.
A completely successful outcome had been against all odds. Rewards and medals were soon pouring in. Never before had cave rescue had such recognition. It had come a long way since the early days.
You've had engineers, window cleaners, plumbers, joiners, you name it, every walk of life, teachers, every walk of life you can imagine. And you're throwing all these guys together, and women, of course, throwing them all together into an environment, into a stressful environment, that they eventually will become used to. But certainly, it's not easy.
Oh, it's been an incredibly large part of my life, hasn't it? It most likely wrecked 2 marriages, or came very close to being the prime sort of reason for their sort of ending. It's given me some of the finest moments of my life. Successfully getting people out of a pretty dodgy situation underground. What better can there be than that? You've given someone their future.
On behalf of all those casualties who've been rescued from caves over the last 100 years in the UK and indeed abroad, we would like to say a big collective thank you to all the cave rescue teams. And that thank you will take the form of a bar where we invite you to come now and have a drink on us. What we do is very calculating, very calm. It's quite the opposite. That's what we do.